Live on the 3 continues, and thank you very much for joining us. Now, from the years of Mandela being denied his freedom to being a husband, a father and a grandfather, it's actually quite remarkable that he arose from the shackles of apartheid with a forgiving and loving heart, helping us take the next or the first step into being a non-sexist, non-racial society. Now, to help us unpack what it would take for South Africans to be as selfless as Madiba in further developing South Africa into a great nation, we have Mteto Chamase, who is a clinical psychologist, and you've probably seen him all over TV channels. I mean, you've really been assisting us in the mourning process, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us here.
Tracy.
Now, Moyiko was saying that Madiba's death really is a catalyst to go beyond the superficial. We've done reconciliation, we've done negotiation, we've done talking, and now we need to go beyond that. Would you agree?
Well, certainly, I agree with Moyiko, and I think for me, it's a moment, as he was saying, of reflection. I mean, if you think carefully about Madiba as our president, because that's how he unites all of us as South Africans, as our president. His presidency was premised on a better life for all. That was the promise in 1994. And I mean, clearly we see that actually that is not the case at the moment. You know, we don't have a better life for all. So perhaps as part of our reflection, what we need to do as a country, as citizens of this country, is to say, regardless of who we are, regardless of our political affiliations, regardless of our race and our gender and our class, have we achieved a better life for all as Madiba was the epitome of that? Certainly not. The next question in deepening the conversation then becomes, how can we do that in our individual spaces as South Africans? Because part of what we do when we see Mandela as a saint, as somebody who's extraordinary, is that we paralyze ourselves from doing what we can do in our little spaces. So for me, I think that's one way of thinking about how we can deepen
But again,
the
you know, one
conversation.
does get caught up in what you call our own little spaces, and you're saying we need to mobilize as South Africans.
Yes.
But how do we do that? I mean, what do you do? Would you go out in the street and you say, hello, you know, what do you actually do in realistic terms?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is for people not to be paralyzed in their individual spaces. But Mandela's greatness, Tracy, is not in him being Mandela the person, is being part of a collective, as Moyiko was saying. This collective deliberately chose Mandela to be the embodiment of the struggle. But then true that what Mandela did very well, I mean, we know about the stories of him calling presidents or calling CEOs. He then realized that he had this privilege of being this person that was seen as a saint or as a father of the nation. But he had practical results for development. I mean, I've been a development specialist or practitioner since 1998 as a volunteer, as a citizen, when I was doing my honors at UWC. What Mandela has been able to do is to actually have development beyond rhetoric.
Absolutely, now we agree on that, but now what do we do in order to remove ourselves from what you call the paralysis of our situation?
Well, let's get organized.
What can we do tomorrow? What can I as an individual do from tomorrow?
Well, I mean, I think tomorrow, leading to Sunday, is part of us thinking about the fact that Madiba will be buried. And I think part of what we need to do is to have conversations, firstly maybe in families, because I would like for me, I'd get uncomfortable. Madiba loved children, but I get uncomfortable at times when we portray him as this father figure who just loved kids. There's a context to him loving kids like that. He talks about how it's almost like an overcompensation psychologically for him, where he couldn't spend time with his own children. So he deliberately spent his time thinking about how can he get involved practically in developing children. So for me, we need to have intergenerational conversations in our families, in our churches, in our mosques, in our prayer spaces, in our political organizations, regardless of affiliation.
And we're talking about what? Let's say in our families, what are we talking about? What are we teaching our children to change the future of a country?
Children need to know why Mandela loved children, why he created the Children's Fund, why he created opportunities for disadvantaged students, many of whom are black, to actually go and study further through the Mandela Rhodes Scholarship. They need to know why those things happen. That's the first thing. They need to know why he was a freedom fighter. They need to know why he was the first black president. The conversation cannot be in isolation to punctuate what we want to advance. So Mandela is a complex figure. At some point, he actually was, is the first commander of Umkhonto we says we've got to talk about why he had to do that. The issue about reconciliation, why did we need to reconcile as South Africans? So when Moyiko talks about deepening the conversation, it's about the honesty, because we want a situation where children are going to appreciate the fact that we've got the burden in terms of our identity, of having racialized identities based on apartheid, based on colonialism. It's a burden for South Africans of today. You have young white South Africans who are going to say, but I was not part of that. But quite frankly, you need to think a lot more about that. What does it mean that you actually have better schools in white areas? You still have Libode in the Eastern Cape, in the Transkei, where Mandela is from, being the worst performing district. What does that mean? So for me, as we have those conversations, Tracy, then we need to have a collective consciousness to say, how can we move beyond our individualism, beyond our privileges? And this also goes for black people, like myself, who have the privilege of sitting here, being a psychologist, when, in fact, I could not afford to pay my school fees at UWC. A political process had to happen where, in order for me to access education, there had to be political intervention. I had to pass, and then I had to demonstrate I couldn't pay, then I could continue with my studies. So for me, the conversation is about us being honest and moving beyond our individualism, get collective wisdom in saying, what can we do collectively?
So you're saying that you still feel that the time now is for conversations, not as though we should be moving past that just yet?
No. I mean, I'm not going to prescribe for people. I mean, but what I certainly find difficult, if you think about the media, for instance, I mean, I had the privilege of going to the Nelson Mandela Foundation and listening to Uncle Joel Nechitenze and Mr. Mark Maharaj. And for the first time, I didn't hear Mark Maharaj as a spokesperson from the press. He was talking honestly as a citizen of South Africa. And one thing he said, yes, we've got the problems. Yes, there is corruption. Yes, there are all these things. But if the media keeps on telling us how bad we are as a country, can we ever be a great country? So the negativity that we have, how we punctuate the negativity, it makes us as South African feel paralyzed. I mean, I recently went to Ghana to an international conference on African studies. Interestingly, from the president to the hosting professor to everyone who spoke, Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, all of them were making reference to South Africa. And I was sitting and thinking, wow, here we are in South Africa on social networks, always elevating and magnifying our problems. Yes, we need to do that, but we also need to think about what can we do, even if you come from a poor background like Madiba. The last point I want to make quickly, Tracy, in relation to moving forward, I'm very disturbed about the state of young people in this country. The South African Depression and Anxiety Group tells us in their research the third biggest killer of young people in this country is suicide. It simply means young people are not resilient enough. It simply means they are hopeless. What can we do? Because that's the future of South Africa.
And if we surround ourselves with despair all the time, there is no hope.
Then young people are going to feel paralyzed. Then they are going to take drugs. Then they are going to medicate themselves.
So let the conversation continue.
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining us. Mteto Chimese there, a clinical psychologist, and sharing some of his views with us.